Lucid. We're going to talk about today about how leaders transform building data into action. My name is Rolf von Sozen. I run marketing here at Lucid, and I'm super excited to be joined by Vladi Shuntra, who is our founder and president here at Lucid. In today's discussion, we're going to talk about how we transform building data and sort of the vast amount of data that's available today into actionable insights and to help with running a building and an operation. Vladi's going to touch on how you can centralize that data, how you can use it to discover new insights that will then help improve the performance of your operations. He'll also end with some great practical tips in terms of things that we've learned from our customers and from the many individuals, professionals that we work with about how to get started, how to make sure that you create a successful project, and also some pitfalls to avoid. As a quick introduction, Lucid is a company that focuses on the centralizing of all the vast amount of building data that's out there, and in terms of making that usable and actionable for individuals. We currently have over 500 customers, and I think most importantly, we're very excited to have over 10,000 building operation professionals on this one single platform. And that really is at the heart of what allows us to capture a lot of insight, a lot of best practices from these individuals, and then to be able to share that best practices across our network and across our many customers. All those professionals include probably 4 main categories. I would say energy management, sustainability management, finance and planning, and portfolio management. I don't have to go into the details of each one of these roles, but we're all aware that each one of these roles really is looking for improvements in different parts of their operation, everything from lowering costs to engaging the occupant engagement to better planning, better forecasting, more accurate tracking. And really at the heart of everything is that we want to create a better experience for the occupants of those buildings and of the facilities. With that, I'd like to hand it over now to Vladi to talk about how we transform building data into actionable insights. Vladi.
Thank you so much, Ralph. So I actually want to start with a little bit of a story of why we started Lucid and how I got involved with commercial building operations. I got my passion for the built environment and how we can make it better. And that story really starts where we founded a company, which is Oberlin College. This is the building where we started Lucid. This is also the building where we studied. It's the Adam Joseph Lewis Center for Environmental Studies, which was voted as one of the most important buildings of the 20th century by Times Magazine. It came before the LEED standard even came to be. And it was designed to be a net zero building and to be extremely efficient. Unfortunately, it didn't really live up to its expectations from the start, and that was due in part because it had so many different cutting-edge systems that operationally it wasn't run very well. And we often see that big disconnect between how buildings are designed, how they're supposed to perform, and how they actually do perform. And it took us 7 years to figure out why the building is using literally 3 times more energy than the design called for. And to do that, we needed a lot of data, and the data wasn't really easy to get. So the story and the conversation for today revolves around that construct of why is data valuable, how do we centralize and automate the capture of data, and how do we make it actionable in the context of not just operations of a single building, but also in the context of an operations of your entire portfolio. And so before we dive into specifics, I just want to highlight a couple of different things. One is there's a lot of talk in the media about IoT, the Internet of Things, which really means connected devices. And I think what's more relevant for this discussion is really the term which Cisco coined, which is Internet of Everything, which is a little bit different because it doesn't just involve things that are connected, devices that are connected, and assets that are connected. It also involves the data that comes from those assets. It involves the business process that leads to action, and it involves people, most importantly. And people have for a very long time been left out from building operations. The technology has been made very inaccessible, very challenging, very complex, and in a lot of ways we have to close that gap between the things, the assets that we manage, and the people that actually run these buildings, and make that a lot more seamless. So that's what the conversation today will be about. I also want to show an example of how businesses are really, the business of the future are changing their models from the start. Data is central to how they think about the value they provide. It's central to how they think about iterating and improving their process and their technology and so forth. Tesla is a prime example where vehicles that are $60,000, even $30,000 with the new ones launching, each vehicle is being tracked in exceptional level of detail. Data is being sent every single second back to headquarters, and Tesla knows how every single vehicle is being driven, how it performs, how efficient the driver is, does it have any maintenance issues that you should be aware of. And it is sort of surprising and frankly shocking that we don't have that same analog in buildings yet, where the assets are literally 1,000 times more valuable, and yet they don't perform based on how they were designed to perform very frequently. They don't provide the optimal comfort and productivity level for employees and staff. And they're very hard to manage, and part of that is because the technology has the capability, but we haven't closed the gap to make it usable for people and make it actionable for people, because buildings generate a tremendous amount of data. And so the first part of today's discussion is to talk about how do we actually centralize the data, and then we're going to have a conversation about how do we actually make it useful and actionable in the context of the work we do on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at buildings, we talk about data. I want to give some specific examples. There's huge amounts of data you already have. Even if your building isn't instrumented, you have utility bills, you have smart meters from the utility. If you don't have that, you may have sub-meters. You have building automation systems in some of your facilities. There's distributed generation, there's waste and recycling, there's work orders, there's weather data, there's occupancy, there's schedules. The list is really long. It's your rates and tariffs, and are you on the right rate and tariff? Should you change that? And so you really need to think about how do you bring this on a common platform, because today for most customers that we work with from the very beginning, data sits across multiple silos, multiple both software systems and building systems, and sometimes it sits on paper and drawers and folders. Bringing that into a common repository where you can really leverage the relationships that you have between different types of data is what unlocks a lot of the value. And the state of the art in most buildings is a far cry from where Tesla vehicles are today. Again, despite the fact that buildings are very valuable, getting and capturing data is a very manual process. And one of the things we really help a lot of our customers with is automating that as much as possible, either through automated sub-metering or through leveraging existing sub-metering infrastructure from the utility or existing meters or sensors that are tied to a building automation system. You really should not, if you're doing any manual data operations, you really shouldn't be doing manual data operations. And the following is a picture from one of our customers, and it's literally a 2-inch stack of bills that every month they enter into an Excel spreadsheet to do the budgeting and reconciliation of all the energy spent. And again, that's a process that should be entirely automated. So centralization is a big piece. The other one is really automation of that process. And some of the other challenges that you may be facing, or if you're not facing, then you will be the moment you begin working with data, is number one, data sits across many systems, which are fragmented. So how do you streamline everything into a central platform? Secondarily, you may have the data, but you may not have visibility into it because the reporting capabilities are not there. You may not have the context. Data may not be normalized, maybe in the same format, resolution, granularity, units, allocation by department. So you really want to have the ability to roll up, drill in, and normalize. And then reporting is often a fairly cumbersome process for organizations. Again, a very manual step. Reporting should be very flexible, but it should be as automated as it can be, because that's just cycles that are being wasted if you have to do it by hand. And because of that, if you don't have easy operational visibility, you're going to be making dataless capital decisions. And that has both with how you're spending money on utilities and also how you're investing in building improvements. You want to make sure you invest where you get the biggest return in the shortest amount of time possible. Guarantee that we have much more efficient operations. And ultimately, this is not just about energy. This is about occupant satisfaction. It's about making sure that the employees, the tenants, the students that you have in your facilities are as productive as they can be and as happy as they can be. And it's also important to note that there's not just many different vendors, there's also different types of systems, and there's a lot of value to connect the dots between what you're submetering or what the utility is charging you and what rate you're on. It's valuable to understand the full cost of ownership of your building, so not just the energy, but also the labor from your work order management system, so that when you do certain efficiency projects, you also understand the labor component of what you do. And also, if you're in the property management business, being able to capture information about tenants and spaces and allocations and find correlations between what people were doing on the tenancy side, on the vacancy side, how different facility managers are performing, and what's really impacting your business and your bottom line, not just from an energy perspective and spend, but also from a revenue perspective. And we've built a set of solutions to really help support all these use cases. So we'll look at how all these different types of data actually get leveraged in the context of analytics and in the context of differentiated apps that sit on top. And so what we do as a company at Lucid is bring the data in that central platform, make that process as streamlined and resilient as possible, and then enable a set of tools that help you discover the insights that are going to help you improve your business. And then actually have the applications and the business process that go with those to make sure that you do in fact improve your business. And that's really the last mile that's really critical, and that's where the connection to people becomes really, really important, where this technology needs to be really, really usable. And so that takes us to the next step, which is after you've gone and centralized all the information on a single platform and you've captured as much data as you have today and have plans to capture even more in the future, you've built your data centralization strategy and you've executed on the first steps of it. The next step is really to begin to discover how your portfolio is performing and what is the low-hanging fruit, what are things that go beyond the low-hanging fruit that you can capture. Maybe you're already doing a whole bunch of things across your buildings, but you want to take the next step. So we'll give you some specific examples. But before we do that, I just want to highlight one quick piece of advice from us, which is that the resource you want to optimize first is your time, because that's your biggest constraint. You have a limited team with a limited number of people, and there's a lot of competing priorities. So you want to make sure that you only focus your time and effort on the projects and the efforts that are going to have the biggest impact. And you certainly don't want to spend time doing things that computer software can do much more efficiently than you, such as data capture, data automation, normalization, analysis, reporting. All those things should not be things you're doing manually, because that's time being taken away from actual action being taken across your buildings. And the other point we want to make is that each of these constituent groups is actually a very important stakeholder. So putting data to use also means that you need to foster a culture of data-driven management, and it also means you need to foster a culture of collaboration and enable that between facilities and energy management, incorporating research and students if you're an educational institution, really bring in the sustainability team and enable them to have access to all the metrics and the data and the goals, because typically data management falls in sustainability's lap because they're in charge of reporting on the KPIs. So sustainability is always your friend, and you want to make sure you make their job as easy as possible because they have finite resources. And finally, finance is really critical. You want to make sure that when you're given money for a project, you can report on the success of that project, and you can create transparency so that you can really enable a culture of reinvestment and efficiency measures, and create that visibility across the organizations all the way to the C-level and all the way to the management team. And all these priorities are going to be different. How your organization functions is unique. I know a lot of organizations say that they're unique. The truth is they are unique in how they run their business. And so having a set of standard reports, having a set of standard tools, in our experience, doesn't work very effectively. So when you're selecting a platform, and obviously our hope and desire will be that you select our platform, but if you're selecting any platform, you want to make sure that it's really customizable, because it needs to fit your needs, it needs to fit your KPIs, it needs to be flexible enough to let you roll up and drill in to the level of detail that is important for where you are today in your journey towards more efficient building operations. And that's one thing that Building OS is really designed to do very well. You need to make it extremely simple for members of your team to go and design the KPI views or the metrics views or the data views, the dashboards, the reports that they want to see, because there are such things like death by analytics and there are such things like data overload. So you only want to show stakeholders only the information that is actionable to them and nothing beyond that. Because you're going to lose them as a active user otherwise. And so we've invested a lot of resources to make sure that the report design, dashboard design, data visualization is a very streamlined, drag and drop, do-it-yourself experience for the user. We've made sure that the analytics and the visualizations are very intuitive. They're easy. They render on different devices seamlessly. And we've also made sure that we provide a solution which is designed for collaboration, so that the platform doesn't expect the user to log in so it will be effective. There's a lot of shelfware that sits there because people don't use it. And the reality is that facility operations is a very reactive profession by definition. You're fighting fires literally in some cases all the time. And so you need to make sure that you deliver the insights and the metrics and the PDFs and the exports and the dashboards where people are when they need them in a push-based fashion. We want to make sure that the platform can capture those insights and email them in an easy-to-understand way, and that it's mobile-ready and supports modern capabilities for collaboration and sharing. And after you enable that layer of visibility where members of your team can seamlessly go in and see where the problems sit and where some of these inefficiencies lie, then the next step is really to look at how you can improve what you're already doing. And we'll go through some specific examples. One of the things I want to anchor with is that the different types of data that you have, whether it's build data or smart meter data or sub-metering data or renewable generation, building automation systems, whether you need different analytics approaches, different analytics tools, and different apps to really make the data valuable. For example, utility bill data you use for budgeting and planning, you use it for doing verification of your efforts and year-over-year reduction goal tracking. Interval data you use to optimize the building's performance, tweak the schedules of your equipment, validate whether your bills are accurate. Building automation system data you use to understand whether components of your building work correctly. And today, most of the companies out there that provide some solutions usually focus on just one key area. And the challenge is that you end up having to work with multiple different vendors to really run your buildings, which is really hard because they all require a common set of data across all solutions. So that's just one thing to be aware of, is you want to select a platform that can really work across use cases and across a lot of different data types. And so if you look at, I like using the Stanford example for some of these presentations because they have a very diverse portfolio and they also have a very diverse set of teams working with different data sets. So the Stanford campus, one of our customers, they have about 600 buildings, about half of which are fairly large. The rest are smaller facilities, and so most efforts are focused about half of these buildings. And to give you some examples of what you can do with data that's coming from buildings, because we don't want to just talk in abstract terms, we want to show you some specific actionable examples. If you have high granularity data that's coming every minute, every 5 minutes, or every 15 minutes from a building, you can very quickly detect things like the base load of the building, the always-on load, and you can very quickly and easily calculate the annual impact and present that to someone in your team to figure out if you should investigate this or whether it's not worth your time because the change is insignificant. And you want to make sure that's very simple. The other examples of things you can do is if you have granular data so you can really visualize the schedule of operation of a building, that really helps you go and fine-tune buildings that have poor scheduling. It helps you make the financial case for implementing controls in buildings that could have scheduling but do not, and calculate what the payback for that will be. But it also helps you protect against building drift. And building drift happens when people do overrides, when the building conditions change, and over time the configuration of the building moves pretty far from the optimized state. And that's when buildings simply don't perform. And that's really what we're trying to protect you from, is buildings that drift from where they should be. Additional examples for how data can be used really falls in kind of three broad categories. The first category is focused around reducing your energy spend. A lot of organizations can very easily do that, and they can get anywhere from 5 to 30%, depending on, number one, the granularity of data they can get, and number two, what efforts they've already implemented. Are you starting from scratch, or have you already done a whole bunch of things across your campus and are looking to kind of take the next step? But some examples are correcting scheduling, poorly scheduled buildings, or implementing scheduling where scheduling doesn't exist, managing peak demand, being able to reduce your base load, buildings that have a high base load use, and keep it in check, make sure that you stop building drift in its tracks, and then also catching billing errors which happen, and optimizing the rate schedules you're on. So you can actually reduce your spend without necessarily reducing the consumption of the buildings. The second category of specific actions you can take using data really revolve around the finances of your portfolio. So being able to plan and budget accurately based on hard data and assumptions around next year's rates and what you're going to do in your buildings as far as projects, not just guesses. And so that way you can not only make a good budget, but you can track against it. And then also making sure that if you do exceed it, there's accountability, there's transparency when you do, and how you can actually make sure you do arrive on track at the end of the year. ROI tracking is a big use case for a lot of our customers. They want to make sure that the capital improvement dollars they invest are in fact paying back, so they know what projects they should do more of and what projects they shouldn't do again. And it really helps you prioritize all your capital improvements, which sometimes have a multi-year payback. And finally, you want to make sure you're really tuning in your stakeholders, both all the way up to the management level and all the way down to the tenant, to the employee, to the occupant, to the student. You want to make sure you only communicate information that people have the attention span to understand, and you want to make sure it's actionable. You want to make sure it's engaging. Occupants can be a very effective strategy in driving energy efficiency. They can be a great ally in that. And you also want to make sure that you understand and get feedback from how occupants feel. We've left them out as a sensing unit. We don't really know very well whether what we're doing is making people happy and comfortable and healthy in our building. So you want to make sure you can capture that input from them. So these are just some examples that are popular across the portfolio of customers that we serve, but there's many more, and so we just wanted to show you a bit of a highlight. And with the time that we have remaining, we wanted to focus on some of the learnings that we've gathered from our customers and working with them over the past more than a decade now. And so if we look at what are the things that you can go and do from here, and ask the questions of do I have enough infrastructure, do I have enough data to connect? Maybe you have extensive submetering, maybe you don't know if you have submetering in your buildings and you're just getting started. Chances are that you actually have a lot more data than you probably think you do. There's a lot of utility bills. 21 of the largest utilities in the US now provide automated interval data, 15-minute data that we can capture and automate into Building OS. There's also a lot of low-cost submetering options. You probably have at least a couple BMS systems across your buildings that you can connect to. So chances are there's more data that you actually have that's sitting out there than you probably think you do. So it's one thing to look at is what are the assets you already have, what's the infrastructure that may be stranded, you're not fully utilizing that you can connect. The other piece you want to focus on is the data that you do have. They may be sitting out there in silos, not organized, not normalized, so you want to make sure they're really streamlined. You don't want to be doing budgeting in Excel and interval data analytics and a software product and building automation system analysis in the BMS system. You want to make sure you have single pane of glass, single source of truth. So organizing all the data in a common platform is really the first step in towards data-driven management. Getting engagement from stakeholders early on is critical because that's going to really drive your strategy. You want to make sure that finance is heard. You want to make sure sustainability is heard. You want to make sure the facilities, which has different drivers, and energy management is heard. And you want to make sure that the tenant and occupant is heard as well. So understanding your stakeholder is pretty critical. And you also want to make sure you agree on the goals and KPIs that you're driving towards for each team and enable a very streamlined process to operationalize them. Again, you don't want to do things manually. Software should be doing those things for you. And also find a friend. And this is where Lucid can help. We can certainly, and we're friends with many of our customers and advise them and help them in making these decisions. But we also connect customers and create user groups so that you can collaborate with your peers at similar institutions, and you can guide each other in making the right decisions and not making any mistakes, or minimize the number of mistakes you're going to make and avoid some of the pitfalls. And so along those lines, what are some of those pitfalls and what can go wrong? Just some things based on our experience of what you should watch out for. The first is, don't place a bet on a single vendor. So going and saying we're going to standardize on a single building automation vendor for all our sub-metering and sensing, a lot of campuses have done that. That's not a very effective strategy, because that's usually a very expensive way to centralize data, is through physical infrastructure. Using a best-of-breed approach is really what works best, and that's what a platform like Building Us enables. Is we future-proof your deployment. You can leverage your existing infrastructure, and you can leverage next-generation solutions as they become available in the market. So separate hardware from software. So that's really one key advice, because you don't want to rip and replace, and you also don't want to be stuck with technology that one that you leverage a wide range of vendors over time. The other one is that you also want to make sure that you know what your goals are. You don't want to over-instrument your buildings, but you also don't want to under-instrument your buildings. So it really starts with what your goals are, and that's going to tell you what kind of data you need, and that's going to dictate what kind of infrastructure you need to invest in to make sure you can capture these data. The other piece to also mention is that there are such things like debt by analytics. So, for example, fault detection analytics tools can take a lot of cycles from your team when you're dealing with a tremendous amount of data. There's a lot of notifications, alerts. You want to make sure you're prepared to deal with that. So if you're going from 0 to fault detection analytics, that's probably not a very effective strategy. You want to take steps and really capture your build data, your interval data, the whole building level, go to the sub-metering level, and then devices. So walk before you run, and make sure that you have a dedicated team member to really own the data strategy. Again, that's been in many organizations the role of sustainability, because they own the KPIs and the goals, and that means they have to own the data. But what we're seeing shifting in the market pretty rapidly is that organizations are beginning to hire a dedicated data administrator for all their building operations, and CIOs are beginning to see building operations data as a critical business asset. So consider and make the case for hiring and assigning a role for a dedicated data operations person that's going to support your efforts.
Well, thank you, Vladi. That was great. It's a great overview of how to transform data to be able to centralize that, discover insights, and improve operations. And I think a couple of questions that came up, they were also sort of relevant to the points at the end there. One of them was this concept of getting your data organized and finding all the data that you have. For companies that, so a question here about, is there a special skills required, or what kind of skills are to be able to do that data audit, if you will, and to organize the data in the starting phase?
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, you need to have someone who really understands the objectives of what you're trying to accomplish, and that's someone who's going to seek the buy-in from all the key stakeholders: finance, sustainability, energy, facilities, and tenants and occupants. The tactical implementation is something that, number one, we can certainly help with, helping you understand how to translate your goals into a data strategy and how to actually execute against it. But as far as skills for a person in your team, it's really a data analyst, as someone who understands how to work with data sets, someone who understands how to use analytics software, someone who understands how to look for trends and how to map business process to software and KPIs. And so those are things that we love doing, sharing of knowledge between customers and kind of helping you put together that strategy in place.
So, and some of the things that you're describing here actually lead to another question, which is, because some of those things are not necessarily skill sets that are found in traditional facilities management or building operations or infrastructure teams. How are you seeing with your customers the role of operations and facilities and sustainability changing in companies?
I think that's spot on, Ralph, because you're absolutely right. Buildings have gotten very complex very quickly, and building operations has kind of fallen to the challenge of the challenge we face is one of complexity. We've layered system after system in buildings, and we haven't really provided the necessary tools or the training for building operations and facility management professionals to run complex buildings. That was the failure at Oberlin, and why we couldn't get that building to perform, as it was built and designed and was handed off to a team that lacked the tools and the training to really manage such a sophisticated building. And so data skill sets are now really, for 21st century facility management, data skill sets are absolutely critical. And it's a cultural shift and a cultural change in organizations. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be something that is a grassroots effort, and it takes time. And someone's going to wear that hat. You're not going to have the ability to go and hire a dedicated data person. That's the end goal. That's where you want to get to. So the most data savvy person that has free cycles in your team, you should invest and equip them with better tools and make sure that they can make the case for a dedicated person who's really in charge of data and analytics for your team. And again, businesses just need to, and they're getting to the point where they're realizing that's a critical strategic investment in their very valuable and expensive assets, and it has pretty immediate payback to do that.
So if this is sort of a crawl, walk, run type of journey that you're on, a question here is about, is there a minimum that I need to get started, and what would be that minimum data set, right? Because it can be a very overwhelming picture to look at all the data that I could utilize, but what's sort of a minimum set to get started, to start building that business case?
It's really the most common denominator across all buildings, which is that every building has a utility meter and every building has a utility bill that it gets and gets paid by someone. And that's something that's very easy to get started with. It doesn't cost a lot of money to go and deploy a solution like this. It doesn't have a large startup investment, and it's really the first step in moving it towards the direction of data-driven operations and getting your team. You're gonna have to be the champion. So, but really getting your team to see and understand and support the value of starting on the data journey. And then from there, you can benchmark your buildings, you can understand where you sit. One of the things we're really excited about is a collaboration that we have with the Department of Energy and the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs in integrating Building OS with the National Performance Data Warehouse. What that means is if we get your utility bill data and a little bit of information about your building, we can actually place you with very similar buildings to show you where you sit in the big DOE data cloud, and compare yourself and very quickly see, hey, we have pretty significant reductions that we can accomplish if we invest a little bit of resources in these buildings because they're very inefficient from where they could be. Or I could tell you, these buildings actually run really well. We really should be spending our time over there, focusing on different projects.
Okay, so it sounds like it really is sort of a great approach to take a crawl, walk, run type of approach, and there's actually a fairly minimal amount of data. If you have that, that's the place to get started and to go from there.
Yeah, absolutely, and it would also give you immediate situational awareness of where you sit.
Yeah. So we've got time for one last question. This is a little more of a bigger picture question. Is there information about what industries have you seen, or what types of buildings, what types of companies have you seen really adopt this or be leaders in this area?
It's really going to be organizations. Typically, they tend to be organizations that manage a larger number of buildings. We've seen biotech companies really take a strong lead in corporate owner-occupied spaces. We've seen in educational facilities, both private and public universities, cities have really stepped up to the game. State governments have put together goals to cut energy use by as much as 25%. So I'd say we've seen it across the board, and we're getting past the point of sort of early adoption because the value of this kind of technology is very well understood and studied and proven. Yeah. Getting support for it is pretty straightforward, and again, most of it is really buy-in and support from the organization. This is not a question of, compared to other investments in building technology that you're going to make, this is probably the most cost-effective one, but also the one with the biggest impact for your organization. And the bottom line is really measured not just in resource savings or building performance. It's really measured in team productivity. for your team.
I think it's actually an interesting point, the team productivity, the visibility to so many people, because I think some of that is at the heart of some of the work we're doing with some of the municipal clients that we have. And there's a last question that just came in. Maybe talk a little bit about trends that you're seeing with cities and municipal clients that we're working with.
Yeah, it's a great question because the great thing about municipal clients is they have quite a bit of leverage and pull with the local utilities. So they can unlock huge data sets that otherwise would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars of infrastructure to put in. So one example is the city of Orlando. We signed up about 25 cities last year as customers, City of Orlando being one of our bigger deployments. And they collaborated with Florida Power and Light to provide interval data from the smart meters directly to us in an automated fashion. And that was done because the city has a good working relationship with the utility, and the utility wanted to support the efforts. We're seeing similar deployments in Nevada. The state of Nevada has a very aggressive goal of energy reductions, and we're doing a deployment with them, which we kicked off at the beginning of this year, which spans 2,200 of the state's buildings, which is a massive number. You really need a large scalable platform to capture that kind of scale. And that was done with the full support of NV Energy. So NV Energy basically builds specific integrations into Building OS to enable the flow of data to remove any of the manual steps that the state will have to do. So these kinds of collaborations between the organizations that hold the data and the end customer unlock a lot of value, because otherwise you're going to end up having to install redundant infrastructure.
Actually, a really, really fascinating point, right, in terms of the relationship with the utilities and the different utilities providers, which adds sort of a whole level of complexity to doing this versus the example you had of the Tesla car before, where it can be a much more contained environment, right? This actually has a lot of other parties that are connecting to us, which makes it that much more critical to really organize the information and the data that you have, normalize that information to be able to really then gather the insights. So great stuff today, Vladi. Thank you so much for your time, taking that time out. Thank you very much for all of those who participated, for the questions that have come in. And we will be following up with you with a copy of the ebook of how leaders are transforming building data into action. And would be very happy to field any additional questions for you if you want to connect with us, and also invite you to visit our blog for other relevant articles on this subject matter. Thank you very much.